I didn't really get a chance to look at this much today. I think these top four, or wait, we go through pull requests first, right? Is there anything? The 6 days, okay. So I think we can get started with this pull request. Oh, that didn't work. This is in.
Just click the easy reading link in the first post.
What do I gotta click?
So, yeah, that one.
Okay.
So Duncan had put together architecture. Yeah, scroll back. No need to go to the top. The diagram about getting an S-bomb into Pace is the one you want. A little further down. Keep going. That one. So this was Duncan's diagram, illustrating interaction between an external decision-making component, a Pace posture collection service, components being assessed, and the posture attribute repository. And the focus was the decision maker says, hey, I need an S-bomb for this component. The posture collection service takes care of that. So now if you scroll down, the pull request begins just a little bit off the screen. Go back up just a bit. Right there, yeah. So where it says OpenC2-based candidate implementation approach, that's the start of the pull request. And basically it adds some words and then two diagrams, one of which is derived from Duncan's diagram, but adds some information specifying what OpenC2 actuator profile and or API definition is applicable to each of the lines. And then the numbers on those lines correspond to the sequence diagram. It's the next thing down, which creates some rough, we'll call it OpenC2-ish command language for what comes in from the decision-making component to the posture collection service, and then what the posture collection service uses the under development software bill of materials actuator profile to actually retrieve the S-bomb from the component, and then the PAR API to store that. And that's the whole of the pull request right there. That sequence diagram is the end of it. So this was an attempt by our team to put some OpenC2 specific meat on the bones of Duncan's architecture, basically. And hopefully advance the discussion a little further in terms of what a crawl scenario for the cybersecurity automation workshop would look like in terms of performing this basic S-bomb retrieval use case. But it illustrates a bunch of things. It illustrates, you know, the external actor interacting with the posture collection service, the posture collection service taking action based on that, the use of a posture attribute repository API, implementation of OpenC2 commands for certain aspects of Pace. And I saw Duncan's hand up, so. Go ahead, Duncan.
Okay, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. That's why I took it down again till you were at a logical breakpoint. So my question was, so first of all, I started playing with some of this myself and hadn't gotten this far. So this is great work. Thank you. Where I was a little bit hung up is trying to figure out the target specifier and trying to generalize it to the case of A, you're talking to the device and saying, hey, give me your S-bomb, versus B, you're talking to the Pace system as a whole and saying, hey, I want the S-bomb of, you know, some particular device. I was sort of hoping that the queries would be the same, with the distinction being just that specifier. And I was a little hung up on that and didn't get any further. Did you think about that at all, or did you just look at the case that was in the picture of, hey, it's the Pace talking to the device?
So I thought about it some, because the incoming command from the decision making component is saying its target is the SBOM that it wants. But it needs to say where it wants the SBOM from. And I think it was Dave Kemp pointed me to the packet filtering actuator profile that has a similar target specifier or actuator specifier construct that looked like it fit our needs. So I kind of stole from there for the prototype OpenC2-ish language.
Yeah, first of all, it's the target specifier. I should have said target specifier, not, I mean, actuator specifier, not target specifier when I said it, because I always make that mistake, and you just corrected it again, which is good. So good. This looks great to me.
Yeah. You know, at least in the back of my head, I'm trying to think in terms of thinking about this more broadly as what we've been labeling an intermediate orchestrator, which in this case is what the posture collection service is doing. It's taking a more general command in and on its northbound interface, and then issuing more specific commands on its southbound interface, and it needs some amount of internal smarts to figure out how those things translate. And in particular, how they translate when they are not the same actuator profile. And we were definitely interested in that general case, which is why we have different actuator profiles coming from the decision-making component, going to the component to be evaluated. Dave Kemp, please feel free to jump in, because you were definitely part of working this stuff up.
Yeah, and Duncan had documented those two options on, I guess it was issue 42. But yeah, there are, obviously this is the PACE group, but Dave Lemire had the insight to show the red SBOM actuator profile and the green posture attribute collection profile, and they aren't quite the same thing. But if you have a component that implements SBOM, then you could go through PACE and query for that component's thing using PACE, or the decision maker could query directly to the component using the SBOM profile. And so that's one way of, I mean, that's two ways of getting the answer back to the decision maker. If you're designing PACE, then I had a question about whether you've got an asset management system, and we've discussed whether asset management is inside or outside of PACE. But a third way, when you have your green number 1 message, the decision maker queries PCS, the PCS could go directly out to the component and ask the component for its SBOM, or maybe components don't have SBOM stored on them at all, and the PCS has to go somewhere else. It would either use MUD to go to the manufacturer, or it would go to an IT asset management system that had it pre-populated or something like that. So this is a great illustration of one flow out of at least 3 possibilities for the decision maker to get its answer. So I don't know. Obviously, since we're working on PACE, we're not going to worry about the decision maker directly to the component. But I think we have to consider both the PCS queries the component and the PCS gets it from somewhere else.
Yeah, I definitely agree with both of those. And we also have to agree, I think it's in another one of my issues, there might even be more than one of them, because it might be the device one differs from the, I don't know, third party, executable analysis one or something. But I will have to say, relative to one of the things you mentioned, at least in my head, the PACE specifics use cases I was doing this was, for lack of a term, it wasn't the decision maker that wanted the SBOM. It was the decision maker wanted the SBOM to be in Pace's repository. And that's really just a setup, because the thing that really needs the SBOMs is the PES. That's the sort of later use cases. First, you got to get an SBOM in there. Then you got to figure out what good is it and what to use it for. And you combine that with other information to give actual posture information. So I'll admit all my use cases weren't around the decision maker getting the SBOM. They're around the decision maker wanting the SBOM to be inside Pace so that it could do something else later.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that completely.
Great. This is good work.
So I can merge this in now?
No objections from me.
So with thumbs up from at least 2 reviewers, I think we can definitely merge it.
Right, I think these were older. So I think we can go on to the issues. Anybody have a preference on where I start with this?
I think you should start with the oldest one that's new this week. So the 7-day one by basically give, whoever gets in first gets first crack, I guess is my view.
Okay, yeah, that works for me.
Yeah, that's kind of a procedural question. It doesn't seem that important when I reread it now, but it's, we're having discussions here in Pace. We're having discussions in the OpenC2 TC about the SBOM actuator profile. But obviously, we can discuss them both places. So.
I would say the defining answer, we can discuss them in both places, and the defining answer goes by the work product the group comes out with. So all said and done, the OpenC2 group is going to come out with SBOM and Pace component actuator profiles, which are very OpenC2 centric. And the Pace group is going to come out with interface definitions. There's definitely going to be gray area where one references the other, but it really shouldn't be. Pace should put requirements on OpenC2, but not argue, where the semicolons go or, which is which. They just say, hey, we need something that does whatever. And then the OpenC2 crowd should, again, meet the Pace requirements and define the OpenC2, but not, tell Pace how to do its job. I think it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I'm okay with closing this. And if we want to document that flow of requirements from Pace to OpenC2, that'd be great. But I'm satisfied with closing this informally.
Yeah, maybe throw in a comment discussed at 3/21/22 Pace meeting or something. We don't a year from now go, hey, why did Sarah close that?
Just okay. just say put a note that Pace would interact with OpenC2 to define requirements for actuator profiles.
Should this be linked with the project still or no, even though we just kind of closed it out? Does it matter?
I would say you should link it to it just so we could find it again.
Okay,
You could always find it through the issues, but
yeah,
it
that's
will
what I'm thinking.
off the project. Plus, it gives us brownie points. We call us an issue.
All right, what's next?
So I opened this one based on some comments that got made at the last meeting, as well as looking at the some of the other work that's went on in the last week, which is really good. That at least some people are assuming a particular interface, and it might actually be the one we pick. But I just wanted to sort of open it wider to lots of the potential choices if we did do this sort of, I'll call it direct to the database in our answer, of which some are sort of more generalizable than others, which is where I sort of favor if we had to pick one. Although again, my preference would be that we just define a sort of higher level interface like the OpenC2 commands or whatever. I would like, I put it first there for a reason, that at least the sticks patterning language to be at least considered for at least, and again, it might be, maybe use that as parts of what you use in the Sparkle interface if we do go with that, because they've done a lot of work in basically defining the terms of how to look for patterns of stuff in cyber stuff. And so I would think that it would be applicable on posture assessment. In fact, I think because all said and done, their sort of whole stick structure is on exchanging threat information. I would think that at least for that subtopic, they'd have it covered enough that we wouldn't need to reinvent the wheel, and we certainly wouldn't want to go counter to them. But I'll have to confess it's not my area of expertise. So even though I guess now technically I'm the editor of it, but the whole sort of concept of the generic query versus the, hey, there's a lot of details and specifics here that we actually have to define the nouns and the verbs and all that sort of stuff. I want to, as much as possible, make use of other work that's went on. In the super ideal world, the OCA ontology group would have already solved all this and we would just use whatever they came up with. Unfortunately, they're not quite that far yet, but I do know that the sticks, or I believe the sticks terminology is in all of the ontologies under consideration by the ontology group. So that was my sort of main reason, is to just, hey, if we have decided it, let's consciously decide it. But if we haven't decided it, let's have an issue so we can talk through the, which are we going to use and how and whatever.
And so when I saw that, yeah, I agree with the goal of defining requirements for an interface. And I don't think we need to pick a winner for any particular implementation. At this time, we're doing work, interoperability events and design work and the ontology work, and that will continue to go on. In addition, we have the first in a series of workshops coming up, and we'll have to implement something for that. So I guess I wouldn't make any final decisions on what PACE should define. I know what I'll be working on as an example or proof of concept for a PAR interface for the workshop. And maybe I'm hopeful that would fit into almost any of the alternatives that Duncan has listed. Again, notice that GraphQL is not a database; it's a design technique, and that's like saying we'll use REST. I guess I don't know if you're using Sticks query language, whether you have to transport it over taxi, or whether you could transport it over REST. But if it's if it's defined in a way that it's interface independent, then it could be transferred over GraphQL as well as REST. So
Yeah,
anyway.
my belief is sticks patterning. First of all, sticks does not require being over taxi. Sticks and taxi are independent, and you can do sticks over other than taxi. But on top of that, the sticks patterning language doesn't even have to be over sticks. It can be used standalone, is my understanding. But there are people who understand it way better than me. But
In
Dave,
fact,
question,
it was built to not go over sticks.
oh, okay.
In fact,
So but Dave, a question, since you have looked at it more on like Sparkle and GraphQL, both of which are really API definitions, not really query languages per se, although you can query with them. Have you looked at their, I mean, all said and done, OpenC2 is an API as well. Have you looked at whether they play nice together, or is it an either or? Like if you say GraphQL, does that mean it won't be, is that the direct to the database interface and it won't be an OpenC2 interface? Or can you put GraphQL inside OpenC2 basically?
Well, since since the OpenC2 command is defined as a structure or a graph, the thing that GraphQL allows you to do is, for example, if you had a stored OpenC2 command with an action and a target and a actuator specifiers and arguments, GraphQL could allow you to query all of the OpenC2 commands in your log database that went to this particular actuator or things like that. So it really is a query language for returning information from a database rather than a general purpose send a command from here to there. So it is a query language, but it works with OpenC2 in the sense that if you have a bunch of OpenC2 data, like in a log database, you could query for specific fields within it.
Well, that's a I'll call it directed database query. Can I, going back to that picture that we, the 1, 2, 3, 4 picture, can I use it on that? Can I send an OpenC2 command from outside Pace to inside Pace saying, give me the SBOM, or give me the SBOM of this thing, or give me the SBOM of the 17 devices that meet, or 17 bills of materials that meet whatever criteria I put in some sort of query? In other words, can I put it inside an OpenC2 command?
The actuator profile for the OpenC2 command would have to duplicate the flexibility that you wanted for your query. So yeah, you could translate an OpenC2 query into a GraphQL query.
No, I'm asking a different, that's a LICAN or whatever. I'm actually asking at the interface, could you pop up that 1, 2, 3, 4 picture we had wherever you found it before? I guess it'll now be in the.
Might just,
so if I could just comment, Duncan, on the list of options you had there, right? So GraphQL is, I don't know if you're familiar with OData. GraphQL is like OData in that it's a standard that lets you kind of describe ways to make an API, right? It's not so much a query language as a way to make APIs, if that makes sense. So if you're making an application and you're like, instead of like just making your own REST, instead of making a REST API, you make a GraphQL API. And there are adapters for a lot of databases that let you kind of like really quickly create GraphQL APIs for those databases. And it kind of came out of web development because the nice thing about GraphQL is you define like the ways that it links into your data, and then the web developers can very rapidly like slice and dice that data however they want and lock it in a graph. It's similar to how OData works. But I wouldn't say that it's not like it's not like Sparkle or um what's it called, Cipher. It's not like Sparkle or Cipher. It's more like an API.
Okay, thanks.
I don't know if that helps, but um, just trying
Yeah,
to.
so it's a way to define the green, red, or blue lines we're seeing now. If we say we're using it, it doesn't actually, we're not actually constrained in some way. It's more a way to define specs than it is a spec in itself.
I would say that, yeah.
Okay.
And I'd said it's a design approach like REST, and I hadn't looked into OData, but so thank you, Jason, for bringing that up. But yeah, it is a design approach.
Another one to throw in the mixer. But
Yeah.
yeah, OData is an Oasis one that I don't know. It's like GraphQL. All these things are similar. Microsoft uses OData in Azure. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's for reference.
So I think we're reaching consensus. Yeah, we'll eventually have to figure out our interfaces, and yeah, all these are choices, and yeah, people will pick stuff for the upcoming workshop, and we'll figure it out as we go. We're not going to close this today. It's there to stimulate discussion. Is that where we're at?
Yeah, I guess the only thing what I'm trying to point out, I guess, is all of these things, while they're great, they're not close to equivalent, right? So like sticks patterning is a way to go and find observables that you're looking for, but it doesn't do anything as far as the shape of your data, right? It's not even like there's no if you think of it in terms of SQL, there's no select clause in sticks patterning. There's only a where clause, right? Whereas GraphQL, there's not really a select clause. There's not really a where clause. There's only a select clause. You go in and you hit an endpoint, and that endpoint might have parameters on it that do filtering. But the data you get back, it's like you kind of go in and make this API call and say, I want these levels of indirection off of the API, and I want it to look like this. And then the server will go and call all the other APIs and put all your data together in the package that matches the GraphQL request. And then Sparkle is like a language to query graphs, like Cipher. Cipher is Spark. So in this list, I would put Gremlin, Sparkle, and Cipher in a group, and then I would put SQL.
I put SQL in the
It's a
same
little
group.
fuzzy.
It's
Yeah.
predetermined. All said and done, any one of them predetermines a database schema.
Yeah, exactly. But sticks patterning is different. Sticks patterning doesn't, right?
That's what I liked about it.
Yeah, it doesn't say anything what the data should look like after you run the filter. It's not, because it's not really a query language. It's a selector for observables. And that's why we had to make Kestrel. That's why Kestrel sits on top and does a bunch of other things. But Kestrel is more complicated than what you're trying to do here. So I know this is all clear as mud, but just trying to help.
No, it does. And I mean, it's basically clearing up this mud is where we eventually have to get through. We're probably not picking, and yes, I do agree. I'll say different dimensions of interface definition by this bullet list of random terms people have thrown out over the last 3 months associated with the project. I tried to catch everyone I possibly could. But you're right. They're answering different dimensions, and I'm against, personally, so just speaking my opinion, I'm against presupposing the database schema at least this early in the project. Like even assuming it'll be a graph database versus assuming it'll be a relational database. Or if we do assume it's a graph database, assume it'll be an RDF versus assuming it'll be a SDP, SPD, whatever the parameter one is. I mean, there's basically some of these languages are customized to particular, I won't say products because they're wider than a product, but they're customized to a certain way of implementing it that I don't think we're that far yet. So that's why I like the sort of the wider breadth ways, like the sticks patterning, or I think the Spark QL one, but I'm not positive. I'm not even positive. So I'll just leave it as, yes, we need to figure this stuff out. Some sooner than others, but in my opinion, we should not over pick the database schema answers yet. And I see someone else has their hand up. I'll shut up.
Sorry, thanks. I'm new to this project, so just like interested in interested in what's going on and contributing as well. Like I had a quick question when we were talking about the database over here. Like so, when we're talking about the query languages over here, is it just like are like is it like are we also basically, does this also cover those like messages in the message bus that we were talking about earlier, or is this just basically like against a certain database that would have some information? I'm not quite sure what the scope of this is.
Well, that's actually probably the root of the question is, are we talking about directly talking to the database or talking over the bus? And I think we should stick to talking over the bus, so to speak.
Okay, so this is basically like all the like essentially we're talking about all the messages that we would be sending back and forth for finding out security like posture data points from various endpoints in the system is what it is. Right? Yeah,
those red, green, and whatever colors we had on that other chart, the sort of three colors associated with either getting data in, sort of interfaces to the concept of the service of getting stuff in, interfaces to the concept of the, hey, we have to store it somewhere, and what isn't shown on this one. So maybe these colors aren't the same as on the other chart, but on one of the other charts, there's a different color one for, hey, you're asking for, posture information out of, and the whole purpose of everything we're doing is to get information about the posture out of the PES. This particular chart is sort of step one of, well, to do that, you got to get some data in to start. You have some data analyzed before you can give an answer to the analysis. But yes, the project's function is overall big picture twofold. One is defining the sort of interfaces that cross the dotted line, defining pace, sort of from the outside world. How do you talk to it, which we'd like to do in a common, ideally standard way. And then the second aspect of OCA projects in general is then we like to have some open source that actually does whatever we're talking about. And we're very early in this process. We are just getting started in both those activities.
Sounds good. So I'm curious that if we are talking if the scope over here is sending messages basically like in the bus back and forth between these various components to find out security posture information, would sticks patterning language be flexible enough for that? Like would it have like all the objects? For instance, if we over here in the diagram we're talking about SBOM, so would it have this concept of SBOM in it, or is this something that we would have to introduce in the sticks patterning language?
The quick answer is I don't know. My reason for introducing it is for at least all things already covered by sticks and observables, we certainly want to do it the same way they do it. If we have stuff they don't have, which I'm sure at some point we'll end up with, I don't actually know if SBOMs per se are in what they have or not already, or could be covered by the object definitions they already have. But if they weren't, we would have to either extend, I mean, they have the whole concept of extensions. We would have to put in an extension to put in the stuff we needed, or ask them to add it, either in general, the sticks evolution model at this point is, hey, if you want something extra, make an extension. If everybody likes it, we'll make it part of the standard. So we'd have to do that first step first. But we're not even that far yet. I just wanted it on the list of, hey, if since all said and done, security posture has at least some overlap in my mind with threat intelligence, and they already have a defined ontology that is pretty extensive. Then that's why I wanted to, and I said sticks patterning language, but I probably should have said and sticks objects or sticks. Yeah, sticks objects is probably the easiest way to say it. If we are talking about anything they have already defined, or for that matter, so that'd be out of the CTI TC, or anything that the threat actor context TC has defined, because they've probably went a little further. They've added some stuff beyond what Styx has. But if either of those TCs sort of have things already defined that relate to security posture, and I think almost everything both of them do relates to security posture, we should not reinvent new nouns or verbs or adjectives if they already have nouns or verbs or adjectives to cover them. And if we do need to invent new ones because they don't have something we need, but it's appropriate to be in one of them, we should probably just feed it back to them rather than, reinvent the wheel for us. That was my main point in bringing it up, in that it's not just the language, it's the objects themselves we should worry about too.
Sounds
if that made any sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So yeah, I have some more questions, but I'll perhaps shut up for now. Like I see David's hand is up, so I'll just go on mute.
Yeah, this diagram, we've already picked a winner for the red and green. We said we're using OpenC2 for those. And the question is, well, for now we're talking about posture collection. Later on, we'll talk about posture evaluation. But number 1 in this diagram, you're sending the collection command, and number 6, you're getting the answer back in OpenC2. And there's a question of what that answer contains. And if we said we're looking for the object. Are you getting the object back in that answer in number 6, or are you getting a pointer to the object in number 6? And you say, the PCS does its thing. It stores its objects in the PAR, and then it sends back a URL in its response in number 6. And then in this diagram, if you actually wanted to get the object, there would be a 7 and 8 from the decision maker to the PAR using the blue interface.
If this was my original use case, which I think this is Dave's chart based off my chart, in my chart, what is number 6 on this was a OK message I successfully completed. It wasn't even the URL. In other words, the decision maker wasn't asking for the SBOM. It was asking to get the SBOM into the PAR.
Yes.
It wouldn't hurt to include the response back to it, but all said and done, in my mind, I don't think the world outside of PACE ever really wants the SBOMs. They really want the answer from the PES, which is, further down use cases.
Yeah. Okay. So
because the SBOM, I mean, I'm probably the largest SBOM advocate on the planet, but all said and done, SBOMs by themselves are fairly useless. Are you doing the licensing use case? Are you doing the architecture use case? Are you doing the security use case? We're usually focused on the security use case. And that's of most value when you have the SBOM combined with the VEX, combined with the national vulnerability or some other vulnerability database of your choice. And then you've done some evaluation of it. And the answer that comes out of that is really your security posture. Just saying,
I would suggest, though, that you probably do want them to be able to get that directly for integration with other tool chains.
Oh, definitely. I don't want to. In fact, to be honest, if you even look at my write-ups on the architecture, you need to do it even for PACE's viewpoint, because there might be, I'm almost guarantee you in any large corporation, there'll be more than one PACE system, and they need to talk to each other. But if nothing else, PACE 1 might need PACE 2's SBOM or an SBOM from PACE 2. So yes, we definitely need it, but we need it mostly in the context of somebody else needing it to do their own PES. Yes, it does have some value all by its own, but the greatest value, or the use case that is mentioned, and the reason that drove it in the presidential executive order and everything, is really because you want to look at it in the context of NVD, in the context of VEXs and things like that. So you need more than just this one document. And yes, we should make all of the documents and all of the component information in all of the documents available out of the PACE system. But that's not its purpose in life. Its purpose, in my opinion, its purpose in life isn't just to be a document repository. its purpose in life is that PES to give you value in the security chain. So we just got to not forget the PES parts, all I'm saying. Over.
But for this diagram, your goal is to actually get an SBOM back to the decision maker, even if that isn't really
okay,
what
so
you're
what
using most often or what you'd really need.
So that's a different use case than mine then, because that's not, Dave said he made this off mine. My goal was not to get an SBOM back to the decision maker. My
Okay.
goal was the decision maker wanted an SBOM, wanted a new SBOM that didn't previously exist added to the posture attribute repository. So for example, I add a new device on the network. I want that device's SBOM added into my repository. Not I want it myself. I want it in the repository for the express purpose so PES can use it for stuff later. Not because I want to do something else with it. So
Okay.
if you have a use case that needs it outside of PACE, please document that. I mean, other and outside of PACE or PACE equivalent systems, PACE 1 needs it from PACE 2. But all my use cases are based on because you eventually want to do a evaluation of the posture inside a PACE system somewhere.
Okay. So for the call, do we want to say, well, it's too early to actually develop a posture evaluation service, but we can at least do its interface, and you could give it a command that says evaluate this, and then the algorithm is it flips a coin and says good or bad.
Yeah, or I was thinking of hard coding them in, not even a flip a coin, but if you give it this one, you always say bad. And if you give it this one, you always say good, not because it was smart enough to figure it out because I hard coded into it that this one was bad and this one was good.
Right. Yeah. So, but anyway, once you get that good or bad, are you getting the answer over OpenC2, or are you getting the answer by sticking the evaluation answer in the PAR, and then the decision maker queries that yes or no or good or bad from the PAR?
Well, that's an excellent question that I think we have to develop. Well, for the CAW, I think we should go simple, but for the long term, I think that question is a good question because it's much more complicated than you think once you start playing with it. At least I don't. It's not obvious to me because of the issue of it's not yes or no. You're talking about a lot of attributes with some sort of non-binary decision making that come up with some sort of confidence interval that might even be a a probability curve or something. It's much it would be nice if it could be give me a yes or no. In real life, it's going to be information you need to pass back. Sometimes information you need to pass back to a human to make a decision, or a human needs to come up with for these type of cases, for these 6 attributes, I'm going to draw my line here. But some other organization might draw their line in a different place, or even the same organization under a different scenario, under attack versus quiescent, might actually draw the line in a different place. So unfortunately, the PES algorithms are going to get pretty fancy, I think, and I don't think they're going to only put out binary answers.
Oh yeah, that's to the extent that we can define it before the call or think of requirements after the call. Yes, I didn't mean it had to be a binary answer. It can be a vector, it can be a pile of data, whatever the answer that the PES gives out. Are we giving that answer over OpenC2, or are we putting that answer in the PAR? So that was
my hope from a very parochial PACE and OpenC2 both centric view was for the CLAW to try and I don't know if any of the people on this call come from existing PACE manufacturers, but to try and tease out of the existing PACE manufacturers the ability to give those answers over OpenC2. I'd say whether you did it in the PAR or the PES doesn't matter. It's getting it across getting that answer outside to the decision maker. And some of the use cases I put in already are specific. I mean, they're really simple ones. Does the device have an SBOM? Yes or no? That is but that's it. That was in our Comply to Connect use case, 2 years ago. So that's a good thing to ask a PACE. There are definitely fancier ones in there for the hospital. I think one of my use cases is the hospital use case making use of the VEX flags, but that's a combination of SBOM and VEX and NVD data. and particular sets of policy as set by the users, and I even have different users setting different policies, that again is pretty easy enough for June to just hard code two, specific examples that we cheat on. Not that you really use the data. You just say, hey, I know on this one it's bad, and I know on this one it's good, or it's this flag or whatever. But that's where I was sort of leaning. But it's getting the interfaces, the green and the on this one it's the green and the red. On one of the other charts, it's whatever the color that comes out of the PES. Crossing the dotted line. That's where I think we want to try and get as much effort as we can. And since there are, to my knowledge now, at least 6 actual real products you can buy on the market that perform this function. And none of them interoperate with each other. I want this project to, as much as possible, try and tease out those answers that we can at least get them all to interoperate with each other. Because that one chart that I have somewhere in this document that has 14 pace systems in it, I think that's going to be real life. And if they don't work together, the users are going to, or who's going to lose. So.
So I had another quick question on the diagram if we actually have time. So what's the difference between the posture evaluation service and decision making components? Would there be a line between posture evaluation and decision making? So we would be evaluating the posture, and then we are sending the results over to decision making components so that they can perhaps action, take some action, or
Yeah, that the whole purpose of PES is to provide the decision making components with the information they need to make the decision on.
Sounds good. Okay.
And the absolutely simplest one, which I know has been in a use case for a couple of years, is just, do you have an SBOM or not? Do you have a VEX or not? Forget evaluating what's in it and how good it is and everything else. Just yes or no, because particularly when you answer no, that tells you something.
Sounds good. And is there a provision basically in this PACE system for also getting streams of data? So for instance, if I have if I am building an XDR system or something, and I basically need, let's say, constant stream of data from firewalls or agents on the endpoint, would the idea be to can I use the PACE system to sort of get that stream of information selectively?
I would argue maybe in the long run, yes, but in our crawl, walk, run model, you're running and we're still crawling. We were doing simple static cases we don't have anything yet. So, I mean, real life manufacturers have stuff, but in this effort that we're doing in OCA, we don't, to define our standard interfaces and have some open source that does the function. We don't have any of it yet. So we're starting simpler than that. And we consciously chose, people can contribute other information, but it could change our mind. But based on the contributors we currently have, we were focusing on the SBOM and related software transparency use cases, partly because, to be honest, they're hot topics at the moment, but also partly because they're actually simpler than the case you just said. So we do need to do this. There's a really lot in the long run. There's a really lot that will go into posture evaluation. We were starting fairly simply with SBOMs.
Sounds good. Thanks, Duncan.
All right, I moved this then into to do. I don't know if we have time.
Yeah, technically we're over, I think, already.
Yeah. So do we want to just hold off on these 2 until next week? Or actually 3?
Could I at least ask they get put in the in some category that they show up on that other chart so we don't forget about them?
Yeah, I can do that. All right. Then I'm going to stop the recording.